This is Terry Beatley, your host of What If We've Been Wrong? I'm shining light into some dark places so that beauty, goodness, and truth defeat the schemes of the enemy. It's true, people are perishing for lack of knowledge, and we're instructed to have nothing to do with the evil deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. That's what I do on What If We've Been Wrong? Rethink, explore, and uncover some hidden truths so that more people can experience an abundant life and the joy of being set free from the shackles that hold us in prison. Welcome to What If We've Been Wrong? Is it possible over the past 100 years, many, not all, but many Americans have been used, manipulated, and I'm going to use that word duped, into becoming agents for communism under the guise, though, of a description called progressives or liberals? Well, my guest today is Dr. Paul Kengor. He's a professor at Grove City College, and he's a professor of political science. He's written anywhere between, I think, 12 and 18 books, and they're fascinating. And we're going to be interviewing him and also really trying to get into some of the meat of about 3 or 4 of the different books. The first one's called Dupes. America's Adversaries Have Manipulated Progressives for a Century. That's one of the names of the book. So, Dr. Kengor, I welcome you onto the show, and let's just kind of jump right into it as far as what have the communists been doing? How have they been manipulating in the United States, and when did they get going?
Since the literal founding of the communist movement 100 years ago. The Bolsheviks took over Russia in October and November 1917. They established the Comintern, the Communist International, in Moscow in March 1919. And then the Communist Party of America was started in Chicago in September 1919. And what communists learned very early on, certainly by the 1930s, when really the height peak of party membership for Communist Party USA was probably in the 1930s. And they had, at that time, probably no more than about 100,000 members. So you're looking at a population of over 100 million people, where the guys like FDR and others who win presidential elections get tens of millions of votes, and Communist Party USA only has a membership of 100,000 at the most. So what they really learned there, Terry, was that if they wanted to have wider influence, if they wanted people at their rallies, their marches, their protests, to literally march and carry flags for their cause, what they needed to do was conceal that they were communists.
Exactly.
And tell fellow people on the left, hey, we're progressives. Just like you, we're progressives. In fact, if you look in the index of my book, Dupes, and frankly in the index of massive documents like the 1943 compilation by the U.S. Congress of subversive groups in America, the 1961 compilation, which is almost as thick. Probably the most common word in the index is progressive. And it's because these communist, Marxist, Leninist groups learned that if they wanted to appeal to a wider swath of liberals and leftists to enlist them into the communist cause, then the communists couldn't openly call themselves communists, so they would call themselves progressives.
I remember growing up with my dad, who was very well read on communism, and as a kid, just not understanding the differences and the nuances, and my dad would say, Terry, you just put them in a brown bag, shake them up, or roll them out, and at the end of the day, they're all connected, they're all the same, it's just different flavors. And then, sometimes one flavor is stronger than the other, but at the end of the day, they're all connected.
That's well put.
Well, I remember as a kid not understanding the differences. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's a good point. And because it's often a matter of degree, and because they have oftentimes common interests, for example, the communists claim to represent the workers and equality, equal distribution of wealth, redistribution of wealth. I mean, those are things that they know that many liberal Democrats would support, right? So they go out there and they talk about that. They search for items of commonality. If you go to the website of People's World, which is the publication for American communists, it's the successor to the Daily Worker, and I should probably click it right now. I'm in front of my computer, but they're probably right now. They probably have 5 or 6 articles up there right now talking about the teachers' unions. Yep. Maybe talking about the mine workers, or what they're really big on right now, sexual, gender, cultural stuff, redefinition of marriage, LGBTQ stuff. They're really pushing that stuff hard right now. And of course, you're not going to find the words lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender in the writings of Marx and Lenin,
exactly.
right?
Yep.
But the modern day communist knows that those are kind of tools, items, if you will, of fundamental transformation that they can use to redefine the West and the culture, and even more importantly, that they can use to appeal to a wider swath of people on the wider, broader liberal left. And that's where you get like an Angela Davis, who was a hardcore Marxist-Leninist, and there she is. She's speaking before the Women's March in Washington, and she's not going to quote Marx and Lenin before those girls, but she's going to talk about gay rights and a woman's right to choose and so forth. That's what they do.
Well, they really commandeer language. Just like you said, the woman's right to choose. That whole thing was a linguistics game. Can you describe, really at the heart or at the gut of communism, how do they look at the family, and why? Why do they so want to destroy?
Well, Marx said that communism represents the most radical rupture in traditional relations. That's a direct quote from the Communist Manifesto by Marx and Engels. And Marx, in an 1843 letter, he called for, quote, the ruthless criticism of everything that exists, unquote. So in a way, they really are the ultimate totalitarians, in the sense that a very strict definition of totalitarianism, which you would get or should get in kind of any political science 101 class, is that totalitarians seek to transform human nature. They've got a completely different conception and definition of what it means to be a human being. And so the communists, this was really a revolution of human nature. They really want to change the very essence of the human person. Now, communists, I guess it depends on which type you're talking about and when, but the ultimate goal of Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, when it was published in 1848, the concluding words of the book, they said, the workers of the world, we have a world to win. Workers of the world, unite. So this was a vision that wasn't just to be applied in one particular country. They weren't like the American founders looking to establish, in the words of John Winthrop from 1630, a century and a half earlier, a shining city upon a hill in America, in Philadelphia, in Washington. These guys wanted to conquer the entire world, and that's exactly what Lenin said. We exclusively counted on the revolution to be a world revolution, not isolated in one country. So it was to be a worldwide philosophy now and governing approach. As to what the communists want today, that's a lot more complicated. And here we need to probably go into making distinctions between classical economic, trade-based union communism versus cultural Marxism, right?
Absolutely.
And a lot of the Marxists that you see today are focused on taking down the West, taking down the Judeo-Christian moral absolutes through culture rather than through economics. And that's why if you go to Communist Party USA's website, if you go to the People's World website, you're just as likely to see them pushing the line on, let's say, quote-unquote, marriage rights as you are on wealth redistribution, because that's now become part of their broader agenda in order to facilitate this undermining of America the way that it was. And they hate the phrase anti-American, they shouldn't, because that is what they are.
Exactly.
They are. Yeah, they and I don't, when we say that, we don't mean to say they're not American citizens. I know no one's saying you're not an American citizen.
Right.
No one's saying you weren't born here. But in terms of, Ronald Reagan said, America is less of a place than an idea.
Exactly.
There's an idea of Americanism in the founding documents, the Declaration, the founding fathers, and what American communists, especially those pledged to Communist Party USA and the USSR in the 1930s, they wanted a Soviet constitution. They didn't want the American Constitution.
Right.
So what they wanted was absolutely antithetical to America as envisioned by the founders. So they were anti-American, and I don't know why they would. Well, I know why they bristle at that, because they use that as a defensive scheme, right? To kind of get their liberal friends on their side. Well, they're saying we're not American. How dare they say that? Pretty soon they're going to be saying that you guys aren't Americans, and the liberals go, yeah, that's not right. That's not right. The liberals don't even understand. Well, if you just take a look and ask your communist buddy here about the loyalty oath that he just swore to Stalin's Soviet Union, why wouldn't that be anti-American?
Exactly.
But you can't even usually get that far with some of these people. They're so emotional about it.
Right. And there's always an element of coveting. They covet, it seems to me, what others have, and it's always groupthink and collectivism, as opposed to recognizing what our founding fathers did, and it gave, what they set up, it gave the individual the ability to work hard and excel, and you'll be, most likely rightly rewarded at the end, throughout and in the end. All right, let's slip over.
Well, they do covet. They do covet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, can I say one thing on that?
Yeah.
The very idea that that thou shalt not steal, which is as basic of a Judeo-Christian principle as you can get, is the understanding that a person owns private property. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. Right? You people have private property, and really, the whole kind of radical left project, in a way, one of the tenets of it is covetousness, right? I said that word wrong. Covetousness, something like that. Well, we could spell it out, but they.
I want what you have.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And there's a sense of resentment there too. That if because someone else doesn't have what you have, it's as if you got it illegitimately.
Exactly.
To the point of where Marx and Engels, they tried to abolish all right of inheritance. That's point 3 in the 10-point plan, in the Communist Manifesto. And tell that to the Kennedys, right? Tell that to the Kennedys that they can't inherit their wealth. Then take it from them.
Right.
But if your parents earn the money and they want to leave it to you, they ought to be able to.
And they ought to be able to leave 100% of it and not have to give it away as an inheritance tax. Do you remember the luxury tax? The luxury tax of the...
Oh, yeah.
When was that luxury tax? Because I think it makes a perfect example of, coveting. And they literally called it the luxury tax. And it drove... I know I'm on the Chesapeake Bay, and it, but across the country, and this is just one of many examples, it drove boat manufacturers out of business. So here they were coveting that. Look, if you could afford a $125,000 boat, I don't know what the benchmarks were. Maybe it was a $50,000 boat, maybe it was a $20,000 boat, but the government ended up slapping this really heavy-duty tax. Well, the people who had enough money to buy those nice boats, they didn't buy those boats because they're not willing to pay that tax because they're too, they're not willing to do it. And the boat manufacturers went out of business. And I wish we could get more of these examples. Like you've got the young girl up in New York running for, young woman up in New York, I forget her name, but running as a socialist.
Yeah. Ocasio-Cortez.
There we go.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I wish we could get these real stories told about trickle-down economics and have real discussions so people, just average Joe who maybe has never read your books, that and they should read your books, but where they could just experience, learn, where people are connecting the dots. It's like, whoa, that does make sense. And that's not right, because they not only put the successful boat manufacturer out of business, but all those employees lost their jobs, that some of them may have lost their houses. It has this whole trickle down, and it affects the community. All right, well, what about Ted Kennedy?
That's right.
Ted Kennedy got duped, right?
Yeah, speaking of luxury, huh?
Yeah, speaking of luxury.
Speaking of luxury.
All right, wait, talk to me about Ted Kennedy and, JFK. How were they manipulated and duped?
Well, so JFK was pretty good. I mean, JFK was a solid anti-communist. Mm-hmm. Bobby Kennedy was a solid anti-communist, and in fact, their father, Joe Kennedy, was really good when it came to communism. I mean, he had plenty of other blind spots, right, mm-hmm. In regard to other isms, right. but they were all pretty good anti-communists, with the exception of Ted. And Ted ended up just being, I mean, where Ted was by the time he died in the 2000s mm-hmm. was a complete opposite on the political spectrum from where JFK stood, probably from where Bobby Kennedy stood, and to the point where, yeah, I have him in dupes as really one of the biggest dupes toward the end of the Cold War, and in his case, maybe this is a good spot for a definition. A dupe is somebody who generally is unaware that they're being used, that they're being manipulated. So a dupe usually isn't trying to cause harm. In fact, they may be totally well-intended. They don't know that they're being used by communists. So a dupe would be Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, Judy Garland, Gene Kelly. Some of these people we just love from the movies, right? But they're liberals, and they're true, genuine progressives in 1947. And Hollywood 10 screenwriters like Dalton Trumbo and John Howard Lawson and others said to them, "Do you believe these fascists in Washington at HUAC? They're calling us in to testify. They think there's Reds under every bed. Well, we're not communists. We're progressives just like you." Right. And so Bogart and Bacall and all the others follow them to Washington and stand at their side and say, they're not communists, they're progressives. And they get there, and Congress presents their Communist Party USA cards, numbers, everything else, and then they realize they've been duped, they've been lied to. Kennedy, there's cases of Ted Kennedy, cases of him being used, being manipulated, being lied to. But one case where he was not at all an innocent one was, and we have this now in the form of a May 14th, 1983 document, KGB document written by the head of the KGB, Viktor Chevrikov, mm-hmm. and it was sent to the head of the Soviet Union, Yuri Andropov, and it concerns a private offer by Ted Kennedy to reach out to Yuri Andropov and to the Soviets at the height of the Cold War, and it's in regard to what Kennedy sees as the primary threat to U.S.-Soviet relations, Ronald Reagan. He doesn't see Andropov. He doesn't see Andropov as a threat. In fact, the document even says that Senator Kennedy is, quote-unquote, very impressed with Yuri Andropov. Amazing. But he's not impressed with Reagan. Uh-huh. Amazing. He sees Reagan as the threat to peace. And this is all set, Terry, within the context of the 1984 re-election campaign of Ronald Reagan. That's just right around the corner the next year. And so Kennedy offers to fly to Moscow to meet with Andropov. He offers to help bring Andropov and Soviet military and political leaders to the U.S. to meet with American media figures. And in the document, it even says Kennedy will help arrange interviews between Soviet leaders and American media figures like Walter Cronkite and Barbara Walters. They're both noted in the document. Uh-huh. Yeah, they're actually noted in the document. And this would all be done in the interest of peace, right? In the interest of peace. And again, it's all set within the context of Reagan's re-election bid. It even says Reagan's riding high. It looks the economy's doing great. Looks like he's sailing to re-election. By the way, funny thing about that, Terry, that's the only case I've ever seen in a private classified document not meant for public viewing, where Ted Kennedy and the Soviets were both agreeing that Reaganomics is working, that it's working so well that he's going to get reelected. Otherwise, publicly they say, "Oh, Reaganomics hurts the poor, favors the rich, record deficits, horrible unemployment." But here they are privately saying, "Oh, this Reaganomics is really, it's just great. The guy's
really
going to steal the re-election. What are we going to do about this?" Yeah, it really does work. What are we going to do about this?
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we're coming right back to talk about the communist. Frank Marshall Davis, the untold story of Barack Obama's mentor. We'll be right back.
The goal is to deliver a message of truth, inspiration, and hope to the world, to unite people from all backgrounds and beliefs in an effort to advance humanity. News blogs, informative podcasts, and entertaining videos. It's AmericaOutloud.com, where the conversation never ends, with 24/7 streaming on our free apps on both Android and Apple. Welcome to the new era in communications, America Out Loud Talk Radio.
Okay, we're back with Dr. Paul Kengor, and he's the author of a number of different books, but 4 of them, or at least 3 or 4 of them, I'm going to be highlighting today. So we've already been talking about dupes. America's adversaries have manipulated progressives for a century. And now I'd like to swing over to your book called The Communist. This man by the name of Frank Marshall Davis, he was a full-blown communist with an FBI file on him. What was it, like 600-page FBI file? And how is it,
that's right,
Professor, that he ended up becoming Barack Obama's mentor when he was, what was he, a boy or a teenager? When did he come into the life of Barrack Hussein Obama?
Well, that's right. Obama would have been around 9 or 10 years old, and he was in Hawaii at the time. And at that point, Frank Marshall Davis, who had become a communist in where else but Chicago in the 1940s.
It's Nineveh. If America has a Nineveh, it's Chicago.
Well, people don't realize. I mean, they think that when they think of radical cities, they might think of Berkeley or San Francisco. I always say that the 2 cities that have really caused the most damage politically, ideologically, are Chicago and New York. Yeah. I mean, and that's and as hotbeds and havens of communists. I mean, not obviously there aren't a million communists in each city, but there was an FBI report that was done that was declassified not that long ago. I actually use it in my classes, but it was 1950s, and literally half of the known Communist Party USA members in America lived in the New York City area. Which is incredible. Wow. I mean, that you'd have literally half the members in New York City. Mm-hmm. But the roots of the party. So eventually the party and the Daily Worker and everything all moved to New York. But it started in Chicago, and guys like Frank Marshall Davis, who was this fairly young African American guy at that time, who by the way, as a young man, like most African Americans in the 1920s, early 1930s, was a registered Republican, of all things.
Really?
Because Black Americans joined the party of Lincoln, and that started to change under FDR, and Davis just went flat out far left anyway. But Frank Marshall Davis joined Communist Party USA in Chicago during World War II. We have his CPUSA number. It was 47544. And he eventually went to Hawaii to do party work there, basically. And that was 1948, 49, 1950, after he had edited the Chicago Star newspaper in the latter 1940s, which was a communist publication. Yeah. So he works underground, eventually goes underground with his political activities, and they called the party, those in it in Honolulu, they called it the church. That was their code language
Really?
that they used for the Communist Party. They called it the church, which I think says a lot, because people understand that the communists really, especially atheistic communists, really treated their communism like a religion in a way, and it was really like, the Communist Manifesto was their Bible, the party was the church. And so Davis and his comrades, they refer to it as the church. But he would be called by the U.S. Senate to testify on his quote-unquote Soviet activities inside the United States. That was December 1956. And Frank Marshall Davis did what so many of those guys did. He pleaded the Fifth and refused to testify against himself. And when he was asked, "Are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?" he wouldn't answer the question.
Whoa.
And he, at that point, he was a little bit more quiet in his activities in the 60s. And he eventually, around 1970, 1971, was connected to a young man named Barrack Hussein Obama by Obama's grandfather, Stanley Dunham. And to give you an idea of how radical Stanley was, of all things, to try to find a black male role model for his grandson, who didn't have a father, didn't have a biological father at home. Of all things, he doesn't pick, a Boy Scout leader or a football coach. He picks a guy who's a card-carrying member of the Communist Party, who wrote fictional sex books with titles like Sex Rebel. And apparently Stanley and Frank drank together and even smoked pot together, which is a pretty bizarre thing for two old guys in their 60s.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Wouldn't they be like 60-some years old? So, okay.
They weren't 18-year-olds.
Right.
Yeah.
In their rebellious age. So for a number of years then, Barrack Hussein Obama is mentored by Frank Marshall Davis. And I mean, what I know your book is mostly on Frank Marshall Davis, but what do you think are the fundamental things Obama absorbed that he later, during those 8 years, implemented in America during his two terms as president? What do you, in your opinion, what do you think profoundly stands out?
Well, I'll try to understate rather than overstate what I could say, because I think even if you understate it, it's pretty strong. But if you look at Dreams from My Father, where Obama mentions Frank, never refers to him as Frank Marshall Davis, only Frank, but he refers to him dozens of times directly as Frank, and then dozens more via pronouns and other forms of reference. Right. But you see there a Frank that is very bitter. Talks about, the American way and all that, and here he uses an invective, right? All that crap would be a nice way to put it. He clearly is anti-American. He's clearly kind of a bitter leftist, and I think I go through all of this in the Communists. I'm skipping a lot, and I say that reference to people that are listening are thinking, well, you're making a big leap here. While there's hundreds of pages in between where I flesh all this out, you really have to see it. Right. But I interview people who knew Obama at Occidental College, which is where he first went in 1979. And one of them is John Drew, Dr. John Drew, who ran the Marxist chapter, the Marxist club on campus. Wow. And now John Drew is now a like a born again Baptist conservative, which so many people who were communists in their youth make that change. I mean, sure. I dedicated dupes to Herb Romerstein. He was a communist when he was that age. I was an atheist agnostic when I was in college. But anyway, so he. When Obama was at Occidental College, John Drew told me he was a Marxist, and he was introduced to me, he said, by my girlfriend who met him and knew him as a Marxist. He said Obama was a Marxist. And I think the kind of connecting factor between Hawaii and Occidental College is Frank Marshall Davis. And Obama even says in Dreams from My Father, the last thing that he did before he left home for Occidental College was dropped in again on old Frank, where Frank gave him another one of his bitter diatribes against America and humanity. And so I think to the extent that Obama went to Occidental as a Marxist, I think Frank was an influence in that. I find it hard to imagine that he wasn't. And one of the things that I say in the book, Terry, is that if Obama left all of that, if he left the left, why didn't he tell us about that? Right?
Right.
I mean, everyone has a personal story. Ronald Reagan told us about how he was a hemophiliac liberal, as he put it. Yeah. Right? He was an FDR Democrat. He was a bleeding heart liberal. He admitted to being duped by communist groups calling themselves progressive, right? Progressive Citizens of America and other groups. Hillary Clinton told us about how she was a Goldwater girl, her daddy's Goldwater girl, and here's why she left that.
Right.
George W. Bush, in his memoirs, told us about leaving alcohol and the life that he was living in the 1970s. This is part of his story. So if Obama left the left, why didn't he just come out in 2013 and say to everybody, or earlier, oh yeah, I was really radical in those days, but I came to learn that communism is a deadly philosophy, right? Responsible for the deaths of all of those people. And yeah, I'm still a man of the left, but I'll tell you, those communists, awful. You never want to make that mistake,
but
right? It never said anything like that. Never. Never. And instead, people like us who said things like, well, what about Frank Marshall Davis? All they do is attack us, right? Are you trying to say that Obama's a card-carrying member, closet communist? No, I wouldn't know about Frank if it wasn't for Obama's book, right? Why don't you guys ask him about this? Have him explain it. He can even lie if he wants to, right? I mean, he could think to himself, well, I love Karl Marx and I keep a bust of Marx hidden in the closet, but when I go get interviewed by CNN, I'm going to tell them that, I hate communism. He could even do that if he wanted to, but they wouldn't even ask him about it. I think the reason they wouldn't ask him about it is because they're afraid of the answer, frankly. So instead, they just call people names who criticize them.
Okay. I mean, do you think that's it, or do they provide legitimate cover for somebody like Barack Obama? Because I mean, most of this major news networks, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I believe they're owned and run by Marxists. I mean, I don't believe the heads of whatever these, or the ABC, NBC. Maybe I'm totally wrong. I'm having a hard time believing they're just progressives. I don't buy it. I believe they're out there to help take America down. Yes,
and I think they don't realize how much of what they believe now has really radical roots. That once upon a time, if they believed the things that they believe now, especially on cultural stuff and marriage, sexuality, gender, that kind of thing. I mean, even 20 years ago, their party didn't believe any of that. Even 10 years ago, it didn't. I mean, Hillary Clinton, she was calling herself an old-fashioned Methodist and telling her gay friends in 2008, I'm really sorry, but I just believe the biblical natural view of marriage between a man and a woman, right? Barack Obama was even saying that stuff. So they don't even realize just how radical they've become. When it comes to flat-out Marxism, Leninism, I think most of these people on the left, they're not Marxist-Leninists, even if they might to some degree have some culturally Marxist sympathies that they don't even realize that they're culturally Marxist. That's another question. But I think when it comes to kind of classical Marxism, Leninism, on that, it's not that they're Marxists and Leninists and Maoists. They're not. But they've never really been very strong anti-communists. Communism doesn't really bother them that much. So if you were to say to them, give me a list of the 10 worst things in the world or ideas that are out there, right? Their number one on their list might be racism. Number two might be what they call homophobia, right? Number three might be people against marriage equality, right? Number four might be whatever. And in their top 10 list, you'd never find communism in the top 10,
right?
Even though it killed 100 million people. There's a list that Human Events, the conservative publication, put together a few years ago, the 10 worst books ever written. And God bless them. The top two,
Yep.
yeah, the top two are Mein Kampf and the Communist Manifesto. I think Communist Manifesto is the worst because it killed more people.
Right.
But in a liberal list, I don't think the Communist Manifesto would even. I don't think it would make the list.
Right. Well,
it's just not. It's not even on their radar. And instead, they make fun not of communism but of anti-communists.
right.
They find anti-communists to be disreputable and kind of ugly and kind of nasty and kind of Neanderthal.
That's right.
So communism doesn't get them angry. It doesn't get them. And I think that's what we were talking about with Obama, who by the time he was president, I think was more of just a traditional leftist, but farther to the left than anybody we ever had as president. And as John Drew told me, who knew him in Occidental, he said, I'm not saying that Obama today as president is a Marxist. He said, but he, as Drew put it, he said, I still see a lot of the Marxist mental architecture in a lot of the things that he was saying, especially on the campaign trail in 2008. Like Drew said, when you hear Obama talking about people clinging to their God and guns, that's kind of a Marxist way of you looking at people and religion, opiate of the masses,
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
Talking about wealth redistribution, referring to the founders as, quote, men of property and wealth, as Obama referred to them. It's just a very far left orientation that I think lingered with him still throughout his presidency.
Well, what do you think he meant when he leaned over to Putin and said, what did he say, I can do more after the election, or what?
I'll have some more flexibility after the election.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe he's still reporting upline all the way back to Russia. Who knows?
Interesting now, too, to see liberals hating on Russia all of a sudden. I'm like, hey, where were you guys 100 years ago, right? Where were you with Alger Hiss? With all this other stuff. Now all of a sudden you hate the Russians because why? Because they manipulated, they got involved in an election and hurt Hillary. That's the only reason. It's not because they're suddenly anti-communist or not that Russia today is communist, or that they for missile defense reasons or the pipeline. It's just strictly because of Hillary and their own political stuff. It's really they're complete hypocrites.
Amen to that. Now we're going to come right back and we're going to take down from communists to progressives, how the left has sabotaged family and marriage. We'll be right back.
Think back to the last time you felt healthy and energized. The best times of our lives occur when we're at the peak of our health, sleeping better, full of energy and focus. We know that fades with age, and you might be feeling the effects of aging as low energy and poor sleep. But it doesn't have to be that way. There haven't been any nutrition systems designed to rejuvenate our bodies as we get older until now. Healthy Cell Pro is the only multi-nutrient system that impacts the building block of your body, the cell. Created by anti-aging expert and Nobel Prize nominee, Dr. Vincent Giampapa, award-winning Healthy Cell Pro cuts through the complexity of nutrition supplements by simply giving you the purest ingredients, filling dietary gaps to nourish your cells and enhance your quality of life for optimal performance. Visit healthycell.com and use code OUTLOUD for an exclusive discount, or call 844-869-9958.
Recognized as a groundbreaking news and lifestyle platform, an alternative news source requires top-tier analysts, strategic thinkers, and impressive commentators. I'd like you to meet Ilana Friedman. She's a strategic counterterrorism intelligence analyst, a columnist, and commentator on America Out Loud. Ilana, when it comes to intelligence gathering and the NSA, the idea of spying on Americans stateside, have they crossed the line?
They crossed the line a long time ago. Unfortunately, they have taken so many liberties that I would say that they have probably, it's not clear, but they have probably broken a number of laws in collecting information and intelligence from American citizens and using it against them.
How can America Out Loud bridge the gap and bring back trust to the people we serve?
Malcolm, you are already doing a great job in providing your listeners with informed and diverse opinions on very, very important topics that give your listeners the opportunity to inform themselves and make their own minds up about how they feel about important issues and then bring them back to their own communities where they can act accordingly.
Our goal is simple. It's to deliver an honest analysis and diverse opinions to keep you informed. Back at AmericaOutloud.com. International news, world events, or an improved lifestyle. Welcome to the new era in communications. America Out Loud Talk Radio.
With Dr. Paul Kengor, and he's written a number of different books, but we're going to focus right now on how the communists have used the progressives to basically destroy and sabotage the American family and marriage in the United States of America. So, Professor, let's take it away here. When did they begin to manipulate, to destroy marriage in this country?
Well, I mean, that has been part of the far left, and I guess, if you will, Marxist project to at least attack the family. I mean, that's as basic as the Communist Manifesto, 1848. Marx and Engels wrote in there, and this is an exact quote, it's off the top of my head, "abolition of the family!" exclamation mark. And it said, a sentence immediately after that, even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. And you hear that and you think, whoa, 1848, abolition of the family was already an infamous proposal of the communists? So it was infamous, and it was a proposal already in 1848. Mm-hmm. And a lot would happen in the 170 years, where we are now, I guess, since then, that would chip away at the family. And I've had some people say to me, don't lay all the blame for the breakup of the family on the fault of Marxism, Leninism, right? Even Christians themselves have done a lot to hurt the family, and I know that's right. That's quite true. But the idea of a deliberate attack to try to take down and redefine the family, right. The idea that there was no set definition, a Judeo-Christian vision of the family as between a man and a woman, only between a man and a woman. That's something that the radical left have chipped away at for a century, going through the cultural Marxists, right. And then the 1960s radicals, right. And then all the way through today. And this is where I would tell people today, when you call for a redefinition of marriage and of the family, and someone like me says, well, that's cultural Marxism, and you say, I don't even know what cultural Marxism is. Well, granted, you probably don't know what cultural Marxism is, but that's what the cultural Marxists want to do. Go to the website of Occidental College, again, Obama's alma mater, and check out their Department of Social Justice and Critical Theory. Critical theory is the academic lingo phrase for cultural Marxism. And it even says in the description that you will learn their gender theory, queer theory, intersectionality, cultural Marxism, all that different stuff, LGBTQ stuff. So it's all, there's now a sort of a common cause there. And sadly, not just among the far left, but the wider left generally, where your common everyday liberal sipping on a grande skim latte at Starbucks can be in complete agreement with some Trotskyists on the concept of abolition of the traditional Judeo-Christian family or marriage.
Right.
And if you tell that to the Starbucks person, hey, you and the Trotskyists are in lockstep on this. One, they'll give you just a blank stare,
right.
Or two, they might just get angry and start yelling names at you, which is probably what they would do. Call you a Nazi and a hater and a few other things. Maybe call you a racist, just to boot.
What you're saying, it reminds me of my father gave me his, it was like a Scholastic reader. Actually, I don't know if it was his, but it was something that came out in the early 1950s, so he would have already been too old for this. But it was a Scholastic reader, and the title of the book was What is Communism? And it was written for, I believe, 8th graders, and it was excellent. I mean, it's like college level material today, because
Yes.
everything's been watered down, except at Grove City. Let's see.
Right.
But I remember reading through it thinking, oh my gosh, if just American children today could just learn what's in this little paperback book, what is communism, at least we'd be ahead of the game. And so, but no, I mean, now
That's right.
everything's been so dumbed down, watered down, and they're not even, I mean, I would venture to say most people graduating couldn't even give you a definition of what is communism or what is Marxism.
Right.
Are you in agreement with that?
Oh yeah, and I've seen it. I've seen it as a professor. I've watched this, and I've been saying since the end of the Cold War, if we don't teach the lessons of this,
right.
you're going to have people in a generation saying that communism is just fine, and that's exactly what we have now.
Right.
And the latest numbers by Gallup and others. You have huge numbers of millennials saying positive things about communism, about Vladimir Lenin. There was a survey done by the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. I think this one was in October of 2016. And it is about a fourth of Americans, I think the number is 28%, Americans generally, and almost a third of millennials. And this is amazing. People are going to fall off their chair when they hear this. About a third of millennials and about 28% of Americans generally think that George W. Bush is responsible for more deaths than Joseph Stalin.
Oh, dear.
It's just breathtaking.
Yeah, well,
breathtaking.
And the Marxists must be clapping their hands. I mean, this has been their work. I mean, that's like artwork. They've been working on this for decades and decades and decades, and voila, they've got it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and they the idea is Stalin, who according to Alexander Yakovlev, who was given the task in the 1990s of trying to figure out just how many people Stalin killed, he said that quote Stalin alone annihilated 60 to 70 million people.
Right.
So how could you possibly equate George W. Bush with that? Well, if you spent, let's say, the years 2004 to 2008 in one of our horrific, ideologically one-sided, brainwashing universities, where all you heard was Bush bad, Bush evil, and you learned nothing about the horrors of communism. And the only thing that you learned about the Cold War was that there was a really evil guy named Joe McCarthy, right? Then maybe you would think that Bush probably murdered more people than Stalin, probably one by one, walked up and down the street and knocking them off. But we're now reaping what we've sown.
Well, let me ask you this before our time runs out. What's the action plan? I mean, and I know there are all sorts of conservative think tanks. I mean, for me, I'll just throw it out there. I remember working a political election. I thought, I'm going to take this information into a minority community, knocking doors, and I connected with one man. And first he wanted to know, was I Democrat or Republican? I said, I'm a Christocrat, and I'm bringing truth into your neighborhood because your votes have been taken advantage of for 28 years. And he said, what's a Christocrat? But it was just beautiful because I was able to share, the history of Margaret Sanger and, her racist population control plan called the Negro Project. Which is decimating the black race. I mean, it's knocked off, what is it, like 1/3 of the black race? It's horrible. That's just in America. And so, and when I went back into his neighborhood, met him again, and he said, what do you have for me today, Terry? And I had even more information. My point is is that he ended up joining my team to get the Christian pro-life, pro-family, pro-constitution candidate elected, and we thoroughly defeated the 28-year incumbent. And I call it loving other people with truth. And so on that second trip in, I said, Wilson, I said, have you ever thought about how come, why is it that back in the 1960s, most black families, mom and dad were married and they had 3 or 4 kids? And today it's totally inverted. There's no marriage and it's single mom with whatever, 2 to 5 kids. And he said, I've never given it much thought. And he wanted to learn. Dr. Kengor, I asked him, do you want me to bring you videos? And he said, no, I want to read books. So he's the kind of guy that if I had given him your books, I did give him books, but I wish I'd given him your books, even though some of these you had not published yet. But what's your plan? I know you're teaching. You're teaching at Grove City. You write books and you're trying to get your word out. Give people action items. What do they need to do back in their families and in their communities? Because if we don't get it, if we don't wake up, all it's going to take is getting a lefty president and a lefty controlled U.S. Senate. They can smack us down with a international treaty, and it's over. We've lost our sovereignty. Yeah. We've lost our parental rights. So, what's the game plan? Give us your ideas. Just a couple minutes.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I guess part of the most difficult thing in all of this, Terry, is there's no quick, simple solution, right?
Right.
And I would say maybe in a way you could take a page from the progressive movement, which is that they've been at this stuff for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
They've been, they were calling for universal health care in the Socialist Party platform of 1912. And they waited 100 years for Obama in 2012 before they got their crack at it. Mm-hmm. So and also too, they realized that they would go into education, and so did the cultural Marxists, right? Mm-hmm. Education, culture. Right. I find a lot of conservatives won't give any money to conservatives who want to do films. They've conceded all of that to the left. They've conceded Hollywood to the left,
right.
and that's where marriage, unborn human life, all that stuff was lost to the culture in Hollywood through sitcoms. Exactly. Not through think tank reports. So there's no simple solution to it, but I would say that everybody, you just have to kind of do your own little part, like you're doing with your show. And like I do with my books, and try to reach people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to talk about your books while we still have time here. If somebody can only read one of your books, which one should they start with?
Wow. Well, okay. So on this particular topic, I published last year, 2017, through Regnery, a book called "The Politically Incorrect Guide to Communism." So the politically incorrect guide to communism, and that is written in a way, kind of very fun, very lively, a lot of sidebars, a lot of short illustrations, and it covers everything from communist theory to history to where the movement is today, what socialism is, what a democratic socialist is, what a social democrat is. So I would tell people to read that, the politically incorrect guide to communism.
Okay, perfect. And now if they have time to read one more book out of all those that you've written, I don't even know how many you have written, but a book that's tied to the topics that we've been talking about, what would be the second book?
Well, the other one, I'd say to read the book Takedown, because that's short. That's probably one of the shortest books that I've written.
Okay.
And so if you just Google Paul Kengor Takedown, and that's the one on the kind of left progressive Marxist assault and redefinition of family and marriage. And then one more. I think I've done I've done like 12 to 20 books, something like that. But I did a short book called 11 Principles of a Reagan Conservative. And these are all short. And that really describes what Reagan conservatism is, and really in a friendly, hopefully non-confrontational or nasty way. I lay out the differences between conservatism and progressivism.
Excellent.
So that would be another one too, 11 principles of a Reagan conservative.
I thank you for allowing me to interview you today. I told you before we got started, I feel like a kid in a candy store. All these books at my fingertips. I want to read all of them. And I encourage everybody to go to the website. We'll have links to Dr. Kengor's books, or at least some of them, and get started. I mean, get book number 1, then get book number 2, and let's get educated. And I really want to encourage families to get reading together, and then maybe have, you could have movie nights, you could have a book club, but let's get America educated again. So Dr. Kengor, thank you for being on today.